Now they lowered their voices as they spoke in whispers. Niniola tiptoed out through the back door and hid at an obscure corner of the building. She wanted to catch a glimpse of the mystery man. As she gripped the edge of the wall and peered from the rear, the roaring laughter of the husky voice jolted her to reality. Her heart did a double flip. She saw Mrs. Elliot walk them to the parked Lexus. Niniola stared hard at the mystery man. It looked very familiar, but she could not recall where she had seen his face. Mr. Pius moved to the driver's seat while the mystery man settled at the back. Mrs. Elliot waved at them as they zoomed off. Then she entered her jeep and drove off as well. After about 5 minutes, Niniola came out of the obscure corner and hurriedly left the store premises. Fortunately, the security guard was absent when she entered and exited the premises. The following morning, Niniola resumed at her cubicle, still shaken by the unraveling revelation. She was restless all through the night as she battled a wave of emotion. The truth before her was damning. She knew Mrs. Elliot was mean, but her involvement in Ham's shipment was appalling. Chioma sneaked up on her from behind and tickled her at the waistline. Niniola shuddered at that instance. Nini, you are lost in your own world again. Don't worry, there's still time to raise your registration fee. Miracles do happen, you know. With a faint smile, Niniola responded, Yes, you're right. Then commenced attending to customers. She, however, refrained from divulging the shocking revelation to her cousin and colleagues. She felt it was too weighty an information to disclose casually. Mrs. Elliot walked in. She exchanged pleasantries with customers. Afterwards, she stopped short at Niniola's cubicle, hovered around her a couple of times before walking straight to her office. Niniola was jittery, but wore a calm demeanor. The thought flashed through her mind, is Mrs. Elliot aware that I was here yesterday? She promptly brushed the thought aside and continued attending to her customers. At exactly 1 p.m., Niniola stepped out of her cubicle to go for her lunch break. Coincidentally, Mrs. Elliot called her to her office. Niniola lowered her face as she greeted. Good afternoon, ma. You sent for me. Afternoon, Nini. I want you to go with my driver and drop some groceries at Mr. Pius Children's Charity Home. Also hand over this note to him directly. Niniola lowered her knees as she reached out to collect the sealed envelope. Okay, ma. She walked out promptly to meet Mr. Okafor, Mrs. Elliot's driver. He had loaded the groceries in the boot. It was a routine practice to drop off groceries at Mr. Pius Children's Charity Home. However, Niniola felt it was rather off that she was appointed for the task. Mr. Okafor dropped off the groceries on a monthly basis. So why her? Niniola pondered as Mr. Okafor inserted the key in the ignition box. In less than 20 minutes, Mr. Okafor drove into the premises of Children's Charity Home. They were received by Mrs. Benson, the administrator of the charity home. While the groceries were offloaded, Niniola was directed to the residence of Mr. Julius, which was further down the tiled road. After a few knocks, Niniola was ushered into the tastefully furnished living room of Mr. Julius. While she drooled over the classic furniture layout, Mr. Julius strolled in casually. Niniola stood up promptly as she greeted. "Good afternoon, sir." "Afternoon, Niniola. I was told you have something for me." She reached for the brown envelope in her purse. "Mrs. Elliot said I should give this to you, sir." "Oh, okay." Mr. Julius pointed to the cushion behind her. "Have a seat." He settled opposite her, opened the envelope, and reviewed briefly, then redirected his gaze back at her to forge a conversation. "I was informed that you recently gained admission into University of Lagos." "Yes, sir, to study computer science," Niniola confirmed. "That's brilliant." Mr. Julius stood up and walked towards her. He tapped her shoulder and pinched her nose softly. Niniola lowered her head as she gestured her appreciation. "Thank you, sir. Let me know when you're resuming school so I can support you in my own little way." "Very well, sir," Niniola responded. "Give me a minute. I'll be right back," Mr. Pius indicated. Now alone, Niniola suddenly felt uneasy. Flashes of the previous day's scenario flooded her mind. She sat up straight and gripped her brooch, which she pinned to her blouse. Mr. Julius could not be trusted, not after the mind-blowing discovery. She stood up, ready to leave hurriedly. Suddenly, her head felt heavy, then an unexplainable dizzy spell and a blurred vision. Before she could scream for help, she slumped to the cushion and passed out. Mr. Julius emerged from behind the curtain in company of a young man. He ordered him to carry her to the screening room. Now in the screening room, which could pass for a mini laboratory, series of tests were carried out on Niniola while she laid unconscious. The man with the husky voice walked in, clad in a white overall. He reviewed the report handed to him by his assistant, then commenced discussion with Mr. Pius. "Going by what I have here, she is a perfect match. We will slate the surgery for tomorrow." "Fantastic!" Mr. Pius resounded with a note of excitement. "I will call the Honorable right away. Don't forget the shot to wipe off her memory." "Definitely," the husky voice replied as they walked out of the screening room. Back at the store, nearing the close of business for the day, Rachel headed straight to Niniola's cubicle, which was empty. She beckoned to Chioma and asked after her. "Good evening, Auntie Rachel." "Evening, my dear." "Niniola is not around. She will resume tomorrow," Chioma disclosed. With a sense of urgency, Rachel probed further. "Is she close by? I really need to see her." "Well, Mrs. Elliot sent her to drop off some groceries at Mr. Pius Children's Charity Home," Chioma confirmed in whisper. Afterwards, stole a quick glance at the direction of Mrs. Elliot's office. "Oh, that's fine. I'll check up on her tomorrow." "Is Mrs. Elliot still around?" Rachel queried again. "She is." "Okay then, see you tomorrow." The blaring siren of the military force was heard as they approached the Children's Charity Home. This prompted residents of the neighborhood to pair from their respective homes, while bystanders gathered in their numbers and gaped curiously. Two military vans blocked the entrance gate to the charity home. fully armed military men, numbering 20, gained entrance into the premises, led by Captain Kobe. The children's home was thoroughly searched. To the shock of the army unit, an underground bunker was uncovered at the children's grocery store room. Neatly packed rifles and submachine guns, totaled at 500, were loaded in readiness for the next shipment. Mr. Pius' residence was also ransacked. A couple of incriminating items were carted away. Inclusive were bills of foreign currencies. Mr. Pius was arrested along with a husky voice who turned out to be Mr. Bode Phillips, a one-time commissioner of health in the state. Rachel arrived with an ambulance, and Niniola, still unconscious, was conveyed to the ICU of the military hospital close by. A 50-seater bus also arrived with a team of social workers. The children in the charity home were moved to another home, while Pius Children's Charity Home was sealed off and the administrative staff arrested. At the store, a team of policemen arrived and arrested Mrs. Elliot as she exited the premises, following a tip-off that her cohorts had been apprehended. The store was also sealed off. Sales rep watched with astonishment as the whole episode played out. Apparently, Rachel worked with a human rights agency. Her intention was to make Mrs. Elliot face the full wrath of the law for the heavy physical maltreatment meted to Niniola repeatedly. Hence, the brooch gift given to Niniola, which had a hidden camera that would nab Mrs. Elliot in the act. However, nothing prepared her for the can of worms which lurked in the life of the socialite businesswoman and her business partners. The high-profile crime made the news, the compelling revelation that the former Commissioner of Health, Bode Phillips, was into organ harvest and arms shipment, shook the corridor of power. Mr. Pius was equally exposed for fronting a children's charity home. The entire syndicate ring was apprehended. Fortunately, Niniola regained consciousness with her memory intact and also got a scholarship from Mrs. Buckner, the CEO of the prominent IT firm in the country. She did not only sponsor Niniola's education, she welcomed her to her home and took her under her wings in tutelage. Now cladded in her matriculation gown, Niniola posed for pictures, flanked by Mrs. Buckner, Rachel, Chioma, and Teniola, her cousin. She smiled and exuded joy.